Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us for this part of the proceedings. It is my absolute pleasure and delight to introduce a voice you probably know very well if you listen to Squaring the Strange, that wonderful podcast from the United States. It's one of the co-hosts, Celestia Ward. Hello, Celestia.
Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
Oh, we're doing pretty well in Australia and New Zealand at the moment. Before we get into more about the podcast, I was just racking my brains. I think you and I met at the amazing meeting in Las Vegas.
Yes.
Was it
years and years ago?
Years ago. And I was racking my brains. Why were you there? How did you find yourself being involved in this crazy skepticism, and why were you at the amazing meeting?
Well, a friend of mine, I've always had philosophical discussions and scientific discussions with close friends, and a coworker who I would have such discussions with said, "Hey, have you ever listened to, Skeptic's Guide to the Universe?" And I said, "No, never heard of that." "Well, there's this whole movement. It's like the skeptics movement. It's like kind of like the atheist movement, but it's about skepticism and, fighting. Can I curse? Bullcrap. I'll say bullcrap. It's about fighting bullcrap."
All right.
And I started getting into it a little bit, and then I spent some time in the hospital. And I think I've told you this story before. I spent some time in the hospital for a bacterial infection tried to kill me. And as a result, I had to spend quite a bit of time just laying around bored as I healed up. And I started listening to all these skeptical podcasts. And yours was especially a favorite of mine. There's something very comforting about the way you blend skepticism with just nice, comforting tones. And, I'm going to go downstairs and get myself a slice of toast and put some whatever you guys put on it in Australia and warm up a cup of soup and then get to the skeptic zone. And, and that just was very skepticism with a spoonful of homemade comfort. And anyway, that got me into skepticism. And then I found out they do conventions, and there was one right in my hometown. So how could I not go? I got to attend, I think, 3 or 4 of them before they ended.
Yes. I guess it was the first time you were there, or the second. I can't remember exactly when, but you came to my attention. I think you were wearing an artistic beret. Were you wearing a beret at the time or something like that?
I only wear a beret if I'm actually quote unquote performing.
Okay.
If I'm drawing caricatures.
Obviously, I'm getting lots of things conflated in my mind. But
I have drawn caricatures at some of the skeptical meetings. So
maybe that's it. Yeah.
And you
gave me your card, and it was this crazy sketch of you madly running with a pencil. And so we progressed a few years, and during the time, there it is. Yeah. That's exactly the one.
Yeah. We're doing video now. I can show things.
You can. And a caricature you did of our dear friend, Dr. Angie Matke, came to my attention. And when I saw it, I was so impressed, because when I looked at the caricature, I could see Angie's character, her personality coming out. Wow, that's an amazing skill Celestia's developed. I know. I'll get one done for our dear friend Maynard. And you did a wonderful caricature of Maynard. And then you did one of me, which I was very thrilled, and I still use. And Maynard uses his on his business cards. I use mine on my business card.
I am going to have to update it and put a little more snow on the roof.
I know, right? And then I had you do one for our dear friend in Melbourne, Michelle Biggersma, and she was thrilled with that. So that's great. That's a wonderful thing that you do, and folks, it's terrific work.
Well, I'd like to thank you for calling it a skill that I've developed instead of a God-given talent, or something that I was mystically imbued with, because a lot of people think it comes with absolutely no work.
It's hard work and practice. I can tell you that from my origami creations. Believe me, folks, it's hard work and years of practice. But let's get back to Squaring the Strange. So there you were, doing caricatures of skeptics like me and our friends, and being interested in the movement. But now you're, as I said, you're one of the co-hosts of one of the great skeptical podcasts. How on earth did that all happen?
I ask myself that every week. I befriended many skeptics, and I happened to befriend Ben Radford. Oddly enough, at a caricature convention. He is a fan of the art form. And
well, he's got such a face for it, hasn't he, Ben Radford?
He does. And it's not often a compliment, but I think it can be one.
It's a compliment, yeah.
And caricature conventions, I have to let you know up front, it's not like a Comic Con. It's not like everybody shows up. Only caricature artists show up to caricature conventions. We get together, we drink, we draw, we pat each other back on the back and give awards and have little seminars, but it's not kind of an open free-for-all. We don't really get spectators. And Ben showed up and I saw his name tag, and he gravitated over to my table because for the studio competition, I had brought a little statuette that I had made of James Randi.
Yes, I remember that very well. It was terrific. Yes.
And I was hoping like maybe 5 or 10 of the caricature artists there, out of like 200, might actually know who James Randi was. And Ben made a beeline over to my table and said, "That's James Randi." I said, yes, it is. Do you know who he is? And then I looked at Ben's name tag and I said, "Do you know who you are?" Because I recognized the name. I'd heard him on podcasts and read some things. And I said, "Why are you here? Who are you? Are you married to somebody here? Which caricature artist did you come with?" And he said, "Nobody. I came by myself."
Wow.
Nobody does that. But he just came to enjoy the artwork and the competitions and the culture of it. And we, of course, became fast friends over the several days. And after a while, he and Pasquale decided to do a podcast. And he asked if I would sit in on the meeting.
Yes.
And I said, "Well, sure. Why? I'm not a skeptic. I'm a skeptic, but I'm not a professional skeptic." And he said, "But you listen to more skeptical podcasts than anyone I know." So with that qualification, I sat down, we went through a pizza and filled out a bunch of brainstorming charts, and Squaring the Strange was born.
So you ran downstairs, got a pizza, as I run downstairs and I get my toast. So that's great, right from the word go. But as we were discussing a little while ago when we were just warming up for this, your involvement since the beginning has really progressed within the show, hasn't it?
I guess I've started taking over without meaning to. I was always behind the scenes, and I would do a number of things behind the scenes. They technically gave me the title of content producer. So I did a few administrative things and was always talking to them about organizing topics and keeping a running topics list, that's a running joke with us. We have a topics list that's like 30 pages long at any given point. And every time Ben comes up with a new one that we should do a show about, you hear a little bell.
Yes.
He's always coming up.
It's a running gag in the podcast. I'm listening. I like to listen to Squaring the Strange when I'm doing my exercise walks and going along, and Ben says some topic, we should do a show about that. Ding, ding, ding. It's quite fun. Yeah.
We didn't start doing that till like the second year, but it just became a thing. And it was usually Ben, but sometimes it was a guest, sometimes it was Pasquale. And I started contributing my voice thanks to you. You kind of really, you've helped Squaring the Strange behind the scenes so much. I have emailed asking you questions, and we've been on Facebook, chatting on the message thing. How do we do this? And what do we do? What do you do about that?
And my best advice is run away quickly. Don't do it.
And yes, you are. I don't want to call you one of the forefathers of podcasting, because it's not like you're 150 years old. But you were in there at the beginning of most skeptical podcasts.
Relatively early on. Yeah. Well, oddly enough, I was doing pseudo podcasting sort of bits and pieces before it was really a thing, as far back as 2000, 2003, I think. But this show, or should I say the Skeptic Zone podcast, the one I'm involved with, started 2008, but SGU and Skeptoid and the Geologic podcast actually predate the Skeptic Zone. So we're all been in it for a very long time. Yeah.
I thought I remembered you speaking with the novellas and like they had beaten you by like a week or something.
Oh, I think if we dig down into it, I can't remember. But, you know, it doesn't matter, of course. But yes, they were all officially doing their shows before my show came along, but we're all been doing it for well over a decade, all of us. Yeah. You've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
So
and I apologize. My 3-year-old son might be coming through on the audio. I apologize for that. But we do not have a gigantic house, so there's no place I can hide from that.
We might get to things about your to do with your 3-year-old son in a minute. So yes, you were more behind the scenes, but I mean, you know, I'm thrilled as the show progressed to hear more and more of you, your input, and your microphone technique and your delivery. I could hear it improving and progressing as the show went on, which is great. You know,
you've given me pointers to help improve that, and I appreciate those. I started doing skeptical fortune cookies on the show, like the first or second year.
Yes.
And it was just something that I would research a thing about a phrase like trust but verify, or you know, various things that have been either attributed to historical figures, or they're just folk sayings, or they're recent sayings. And, you know, and so I would do like a little like 1.5-minute blurb about that saying. And I called it a skeptical fortune cookie.
And you'd have the sound effect of the cookie opening.
Yeah, that was all Pasquale. But
right.
We do have an audio engineer among our threesome here. And from there, I sat in on one of the episodes that was about gambling superstitions, because I live in Las Vegas. And then as things became easier to do remotely, and you know, people have been doing podcasts from different cities all the time. I started becoming a regular part of the podcast, and it just became the three of us. And that seems to really worked out, because the three of us bring vastly different backgrounds. Ben is an editor and a writer and a professional, you know, skeptic who's been in it forever, and an investigator. He's gone and investigated a bunch of purported hauntings and helped people who thought that their homes were haunted. And he's got the chops, the research chops. And then Pasquale is a tattooed hard rock guitarist, worked in LA, you know, knows a bunch of showbiz stuff.
Big beard. He looks like he's just hopped off a Harley Davidson. When I met him, I mean, he walked into the restaurant and it looked like he's just got off his Harley. It was on Route 66. And, you know, Pasquale and I had never met before. But as soon as we saw each other, it was a really sincere man hug and great to meet you, this sort of thing. And we got on instantly. And he's that sort of guy, isn't he? He's a wonderful guy.
Yeah, his voice does not convey how large and mannish he looks. He's got a very genteel, like, you know, very laid back sort of voice. Yeah. And then and he's also an audio engineer. So he, you know, I think he was just recently on the Skeptic Zone talking about the 5G conspiracies.
He was indeed, yes.
What 5G is actually all about.
Yes, he was.
And then I'm a cartoonist. I've studied people's faces my whole life. I'm big on pareidolia. In fact, that was one of the things Ben, right after he saw me with my James Randi sculpture, like the next day or a couple hours later or something, he comes over with one of the old magazines. We have a trade publication called Exaggerated Features. And I had written a bunch of stuff for them, and one of the articles was all about pareidolia, and he threw it on my desk. He goes, "You wrote this?" And I'm like, "Yes, I did." And we started talking pareidolia for a while. And
well, one of the really interesting episodes of Squaring the Strange, and I certainly can't recall which one it is off the top of my head, where you were talking about somebody drawing someone from memory, and you were pointing out, as an artist, you knew when you're doing the facial features, to get the proportions exactly right means you're copying from a photograph. You're not. Do you remember this conversation? In other words,
I don't think I said exactly that, because I mean, you can do a lot of stuff from memory, and you can do a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But
you can tell if somebody's more or less tracing from a photograph. You know, it doesn't look like a drawing.
Not exactly, but I think I think you're thinking of the Dove ads, the ads about women and their self-esteems and how they describe themselves to another
possibly
person.
Yes. Yeah. I could absolutely.
This they had this forensic artist who was hearing descriptions and drawing people from, and there was just too many red flags in that, where I'm like, I'm very skeptical of this whole ad campaign, the way that they're presenting it. And I guarantee you the artist knows what the purpose is from what he's been producing here.
That's right. Yes. Sorry, it's just flipping around my mind at the moment. I can't remember the exact details, but I do remember thinking, wow, what a fascinating insight. Something that never occurred to me.
I wish I could remember exactly what I said, because that was a few years ago. But
yes, it was. Yeah.
When the Dove ads came out purporting to have these, it was essentially this forensic artist listened behind a shield and only drew these women from descriptions of themselves.
Right.
And he got a remarkable likeness, which seemed a little like, I don't know if you can get a remarkable likeness unless you. The trick with forensic artwork is not the drawing ability; it's being able to pull the details from the witness,
right?
And show them all. Does he have a nose like this or a nose like that?
Yes.
And so I questioned exactly how much of a real experiment that was versus just an ad. And it was to sell you something.
Apart from being a very interesting and entertaining segment to listen to, I thought, you know what? I'd never thought of that. Never thought of that angle in investigation. But it takes someone like you with your skill and background to bring this to our attention, say, here's another aspect you probably didn't think about. Oh, wow.
Well, it's also a community I'm plugged into. I wasn't just talking about my own experience drawing people. I had listened to a bunch of comments. People had started threads about it. Portrait artists, people who did do courtroom drawings were like commenting about the Dove ads. And so I was plugged into that whole community, sort of breaking that down.
Now, before we get into talking about the strange gurgling noises we're hearing from the other room or not, I'm not sure. That's Rick, I can't hear a thing. Maybe for the sake of our audience, just a little bit more about Squaring the Strange, because I think it's a terrific podcast. I enjoyed it very much. From a technical point of view, now you're very involved with putting the damn thing together, aren't you?
Well, that sort of fell into my lap because we had some, life gets in the way. All of us have got various things to deal with. We've all got families. We've all got jobs. And Pasquale found himself starting a new job, and various things at home had changed, and they had a death in the family, and everything went crazy for a while. And Pasquale had been editing the show, and he said, I could show you how. And I said, okay, sure. So he showed me how. I edited the show, and I liked doing it. It's not a terribly complicated thing to edit a podcast on Audacity. And so I started doing it, and then I just kept with it. And now I'm the podcast editor and trying to do a decent job. There's plenty I still need to learn, but I get by. So I do the podcast editing.
Yeah. And from a technical point of view, of course, when the three of you are doing an episode, you're all in completely different locations.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. And how does that work?
Well, it works okay. I am in Las Vegas, and Ben and Pasquale are in New Mexico. Yes. And it's the same sort of climate. We're actually not all that. If your listenership might not know the layout of the United States, but we're not that far from each other. We're like a state away. Like I'm in the bottom of Nevada, and they're in the bottom of New Mexico. So it's like just go across Utah and you're there, or not, rather go across Arizona and you're there.
Yes. So, but you say, right, we're meeting, I don't know, when you record the show on whatever evening or afternoon, and how do you hook up? How are you hearing each other to conduct the podcast?
We use a platform. There's a number of platforms available online. The one that we've been using is Zencaster.
Right.
It has a few bugs, but they've seemed to work those out. But there's plenty of other, I can't think of the names offhand, but there's a number of other online platforms you just sign up for and subscribe to. And so all of the software is online. You don't have to load anything. You just plug into it, sign up, and then you can take people So we've been able to interview people from all over the world. We actually just interviewed Bob Bartholomew, who lives in Auckland, New Zealand.
That's fantastic. And I think, and from memory, I think I joined you a couple of years ago as a guest on the show. And I think that's all browser based, wasn't it?
Yes.
You basically, you give your guests a URL and away you go. But it's impressive because when you're listening to the show as a listener, when the three of you are chatting, it's like you're all next to each other in the studio.
Thankfully there's not really a delay or anything, so we can just chat, and of course there's editing stuff that you don't hear or see behind the scenes.
Tell me about it.
Where if we do talk over each other, we try and untangle that out. So
yes, folks, if you're ever wondering, putting together a podcast is not as simple as running around and doing interviews and getting together and talking. That's just the beginning. Then you've got the edit, which depending on the segment or the guest or the report, be an extensive experience, a long experience. Yeah.
The sausage has to get made. And if you don't end up editing this particular video, you might hear my dog barking and my child loudly reciting the alphabet.
I thought it was out here, but
I remember we have very different podcasting obstacles. I've got the dog and the child, and then I remember you telling me, oh, these damn lorikeets. And I'm like, what are those? And you sent me these photos of these exotic, beautiful birds that would be treasured as pets and sold for hundreds of dollars if they were here in the United States. But they're apparently like pigeons for you guys. They're just everywhere. when you
get several hundred in the tree next door, that's it. You pack up the podcast and you just go down and have a nice cold drink or something. Now, before we go, and speaking about the funny gurgling noises from the next room, of course, you're a relatively new mom. You've been a mom now for a few years, and just from your point of I was just about to say, just from your point of view and being involved in critical thinking and skepticism, you must have, especially in the early days, come across a fair bit of, shall we say, woo and nonsense aimed at young mothers.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm not a young mother, but I'm a new mother.
A new mother.
I waited quite a while before I decided to procreate. And mainly when you're pregnant, that seems to be the target zone. When you are pregnant and when you're a very new mother and you're breastfeeding. I mean, and I got sucked up into a lot, not fully, but you got to kind of like harness your feelings, because your body is flooded with all sorts of hormones and worries, and you're in this altered state of mind where you're just trying to do everything right, and you're paranoid about all the things that can go wrong. And so if you hear, breast milk is the best thing for your child, even if you're a skeptic, you're like, well, I should try, and I tried, and I was just not one of those ones that could breastfeed easily. And I had a discussion with my doctor, my OBGYN, and he said, well, why are you trying to breastfeed? I said, because it's supposed to be, I'm a skeptic. I know it's not completely, everything they say, but it does give the child antibodies, right? And he said, well, yeah, a little bit temporarily. And I said, what are the reasons to breastfeed? And he said, the number one reason is it saves money. Formula costs money. It saves money. And I thought about that, and I had turned down a $500 job because I need an overtime thing. I had been hired to do like 2 hours at this corporate event, and they wanted me to stay later, and I could not because I didn't bring my pumping apparatus with me. And I don't know if I can use the word engorged, but I was engorged and I needed to get home.
I think we understand. Yes.
I can't stay for another 2 hours. I have to go.
Yeah.
And I turned, and a big corporate gig like that, you're turning down a lot of money. And I'm like, that would have bought months worth of formula. Why am I doing this if the only reason is to save some money? So
interesting. Yeah.
So you can get caught up in things because one thing we've learned as skeptics, especially working with other skeptics, like I can be very knowledgeable about a certain area that Pasquale and Ben aren't. And Ben can know a lot of things that Pasquale and I don't. And you need to go to the people who know the material. And as a new mother, it's just almost impossible to research absolutely everything that comes at you in the short amount of time you have.
Yeah.
You're only a mother for, you're a mother forever, I guess, after you have a child, but,
yes.
But you're only pregnant and then have a newborn for so long. That's a limited amount of time. And you get you're also on limited sleep and you're just deluged with information. And so it helps to have a skeptical toolkit, but
Yeah.
A
little bit of critical thinking can go a long way. Well, listen, Celestia, wow, what a treat to catch up with you again. We're old friends. Apart from anything else, we are good, firm friends. We've known each other for many years. It was always a great delight to see you in person. Haven't seen you in person for far too long.
I hope you can get out to SciCon, one of the times that they have the SciCon.
Well, now the world is, this is a skeptical thing to do. Now the world is, fingers crossed, getting a bit more together after the pandemic. We'll have to wait and see. Now, when people want to check out your podcast, if they haven't heard Squaring the Strange so far, where should they run to find out more?
We've just got a link tree started. So if you go to squaringthestrange.com, you'll find our little link tree that goes to various things about the show. And of course, the show, Squaring the Strange, you'll find that on libsyn.com and all your podcast dispensers. So
yes. And of course, if you listen to the Skeptic Zone, you'll often hear promotions for Squaring the Strange, because I'm very pleased to keep promoting the show, because I believe it's a good show and it's an entertaining show with 3 wonderful hosts, including our guest today, Celestia Ward. Celestia Ward, all the way over there in fabulous Las Vegas. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Richard.